Good morning, everyone. Raul Fernandez, Select Board Member and Chair of the Task Force to Reimagine Policing in Brookline. This is our meeting for September 11th, 2020. Glad to have you all with us. So wanted to pick up a little bit where we left off, just to sort of frame the time that we're going to have together. In a minute, we're going to do an approval of the minutes of last week. We're also going to have Devin talk briefly with us about just open meeting law and making sure that we're aware with some compliance that we need to have there. Not that anyone's been out of compliance as far as I know, but just to make sure that we're on the same page with what's required. Want to talk about what the expectations are for this meeting, and you'll see as we go down the agenda that we want to sort of start to really get into a little bit more what our focus areas are going to be. We'll get to that in just a bit. Wanted to start first by doing an approval of the meeting minutes. These you should all have been getting every week in the packet, and these are required for all of us to read and then vote on at each meeting. And Devin says thanks to everyone who sent in edits. That's always very good too. Devin, can we do a roll call vote to approve the meeting minutes?
Yes.
The most helpful way, I think, to everybody is just everyone that's going to be voting to unmute, so we don't have to do the mute unmute thing, and we'll just go quickly through our voting.
Do you want me to run that off?
Yeah, please do.
Mike Sandman?
Yes.
Bonnie?
Yes.
Malcolm?
Yes.
Almas?
I don't see her here.
Itan?
Yes.
Kimberly?
Kimberly, we saw you say yes, I believe, but we didn't hear you say yes. If you can unmute, that'd be great.
Kristen?
Yes.
Anne?
Yes.
Alexander?
Aye.
Chi-Chi?
Yes.
All right, thanks everyone.
It's a yes for me too. And Kimberly, there you go.
And the
Yes.
chair and Kimberly. All right.
It's all right. We're good. Okay, great. Devin, I want to turn it over to you for a couple moments to talk. Well, I addressed it earlier on. Go for it.
Perfect. Thanks so much, everybody. My name is Devin Williams. I'm the Director of Administrative Services for the town, and I will be your staff person, as you know, on this committee, which I am very excited to do. I put a memo in your packet, which you should have received yesterday. That's also available in the public information packet, which is online on our website. You can see that on the boards and commissions page. But just basically going over the process for submitting items, which some of you have already done. I'm so grateful for, if there's documentation that you want to share with the chair and have something be put on a future agenda, or if you have something that you'd like the group to see and share that way, all that communication should go directly to me. It can also go to me and Raul, but like we mentioned before, you cannot be sharing as a group because that is a violation of the open meeting law. You'll see in the memo that I put together just a little timeline schedule of when things should be submitted. If you'd like something on the agenda, roughly a week in advance, so the chair can plan to create that agenda, because as many of you know, for the public records law, we do need to post the meetings 48 hours in advance. And so it takes a little bit of time to get that content prepared, and then the public packet, which includes all of that backup documentation. So great job, keep up the good work on that. And if you have further questions about that, I mentioned in the memo, Michael Downey is also the town council liaison, so he can kind of expand on the legal requirements there. I did include in that memo as well the initial training documents from the Attorney General's office, which I sent to you folks when you were first appointed. If you have not yet had time to complete those trainings, that's okay. You have 120 days until it's required. You need to make sure that you've gone over your open meeting law, public records law, and there's also an ethics training in there. So if you have any questions about that, you can definitely contact me and Michael. And like I said, if you could give us, a week before the meeting to try and suss out any items that you might want on the agenda, that would be great. If it's more informal, like informational material that you want to share with the larger group, you can send that to me and I'll constantly be updating your folder in OneDrive. And I did mention this to the committee on Wednesday, so I'm happy to walk anyone through OneDrive if you're not familiar with that cloud-based software. I often have committee members, bookmark the actual committee folder, and then within that, I'll always populate a meeting folder for each time you folks gather. So if you have any questions, now is the time to ask them for me or for Michael, or, anything on that topic. Okay.
Okay, great. Thanks, Devin. Yeah, remember that there's a lot of information in our packet for each week's meeting. It's really important to read those beforehand. One of the things that I actually asked Devin to add to the packet this morning were some remarks that I'll deliver now. But if you have access to the packet, you should be able to see them, and I encourage you to follow along. I will note one thing before we begin. We talked last week about having a presentation this week around the data from 911 calls, crime data. We're going to need one more week to get all of those data ready to more properly present to the task force. So expect that to happen next week. Okay. What I wanted to do this week is first to have a discussion and differentiating between reform and reimagining based on a number of the questions and comments that came up in last week's meeting. And so, I wanted to start off by recentering us on the charge of the task force and to make some distinctions between reform and reimagining that I hope are going to be helpful in centering us in this work. So as our charge states, the task force to reimagine policing in Brookline will explore and recommend new approaches to public safety and policing in Brookline. The task force will utilize a data-informed approach to interrogate our current model and provide a distinctly alternative approach to public safety. The charge goes on to make clear that our role is first to seek to understand our current approach to public safety, something we began to do last week, and to understand how certain populations, including but not limited to communities of color, are experiencing policing in Brookline. Ultimately, we're tasked to explore and conceptualize alternative models of public safety and to consider which police functions are better suited for other departments. For all its merits, what our charge does not do is draw bright lines between the reimagining work we're asked to do versus the work being done by the Reform Committee. This is a challenge we'll face on and off during our time together, and I'll do my best to help guide us to do the work that's firmly within the realm of reimagining while redirecting questions about police reforms to the appropriate committee. I'll also work with the chair of the Reform Committee and any of its relevant subcommittees to manage communication when there's an overlap in our interests. So what's in our purview and what's not? Well, that's really up to us, but I'd like to propose that anything that involves improving the way police currently function is actually a matter for the Reform Committee. That goes for use of force policies, body and dash cams, the police complaint process, hiring, training, and discipline. Interrogating these matters and proposing reforms is critical, and as a select board member, I'll press to make sure that work is done by the Reform Committee. So what's left for us? A lot, actually. My sense is that we need to do the following three things. One, identify functional areas within the police department that we think may need to be eliminated or are ripe for reimagining. Programs like school resource officers, the walk and talk unit, traffic enforcement, and others. Once identified, break off into subcommittees that will conduct a thorough program analysis, which involves understanding the stated basis for the program's existence as grounded in the expressed needs of the community, the concrete objectives of the program, and the evidence that the program is meeting those objectives. From there, solicit and consider community input, explore and conceptualize alternative approaches, and bring recommendations to the full task force. That's the first one, is the program analysis. Second, identify community issues that are currently being addressed by the department that perhaps should be handled by a different body. Issues like mental health and homelessness, for instance. explore the scope and nature of those issues in Brookline, analyze the police department's current approach to addressing those issues, solicit and consider community input, explore and conceptualize alternative approaches, and bring recommendations to the full task force. So we have program analysis, and then really looking at community issues that are currently addressed by the police department that might be addressed in other ways. And then third, conduct a department level analysis considering crime rates and community needs, some of the information that we'll get at our meeting next week. Using guiding questions like, is the size of our police force appropriate considering the size of our community and the crime rate in our community? And are there calls for service, 911 and direct, to the police department, which generally elicit a police response that may be better handled by other means? Again, analyze the data, solicit and consider community input, explore and conceptualize alternative approaches, and bring recommendations to the full task force. So again, those three areas are the one I just described: department level analysis, program level analysis, and analyzing community needs. In this framework, I can imagine one subcommittee conducting the department level analysis and some number of subcommittees conducting the program level or issue-based analyses based on what this task force decides we should focus on. If you're supportive of this approach, we can decide on our focus areas today or at a future meeting, and then I can send a survey where you indicate what subcommittees you're interested in serving on, and I'll use your responses to determine the membership for each subcommittee. So that's my proposal. I'm interested to hear first what you think about the structure of that proposal. Are you into it? What's missing? Do you have an alternative proposal? If we can agree on a structure, then I'd also love to have some preliminary conversations about what you think some of those program level and issue level based focus areas should be. But first, if we can talk about the structure itself, what are your thoughts? And if anybody would like to start off, and one of the things that it's important that you all know about me is, as we start, is, you know, my focus is on the end result. So there's no pride of ownership in terms of exactly how we get there, as long as that we're thoughtful in our process, we're efficient in our process, and we keep our eyes on the prize, which is the reason why we're all here. So I'm happy to hear any edits or alternative proposals, or especially to hear what might be missing in this, what we're not covering. Who'd like to get us started? Bonnie, I see you.
I did not do the little raise hand feature, but
Sorry.
I'm going to try not to wander in my brain here. So as someone who thinks about ideas around police abolition, prison abolition regularly, when I think of a process like that, I realize we are not here to abolish the police necessarily. That word is often unnerving to people, but that word generally means, to me at least, making these institutions obsolete. And how you make an institution like this obsolete is by building the services that can support everybody, that can make people's lives better, so that crime is reduced, so that there's just less to do for institutions like police. So I realized that this structure that we are in does not allow for a whole lot of flexibility. It doesn't allow for a whole lot of creative process here. Like we are so tight for time that we aren't going to be able to sit here and just, you know, think really big thoughts and say ridiculous thoughts and say really, you know, big, hard truths maybe, or at least maybe not as I would naturally do it in this circumstance. So I just want to put that feeling out there. I also want to say that this process is a little uncomfortable for me, which is also maybe a part of the task force, this whole model within the town, is that when you do this work, you have to do both things, like build these social structures as well as imagine how you don't need these bits of the police department That's how you do like the enormous work that we're doing. So I don't exactly know what that means, but part of me is struggling with moving forward so quickly. But I understand that we need to come up with some stuff, and a lot of these things feel like, I don't want to say low-hanging fruit, but these are the tactics that many places are taking. So I just want to put that out there into the world. I'm curious what other people think.
Me too. Alexander, I see you.
So I very much agree with, I think one of the things underlying the proposal here is that I've felt a little bit in the last couple of meetings we have been talking a lot on reform subjects. And I think part of that may just be the nature of the type of discussions we've been having, where we were talking with Chief O'Leary, and we're looking into specific things that might change about the police department. And I think that's all good. And then this sort of touches on what you were talking about, Bonnie. I think what would be really useful today, and I think this is very much part of what you're proposing, Raul, but tell me if I'm wrong, is today, in addition to talking about the specific parts of your proposal in terms of issues beyond that aren't currently specifically addressed by department structure, and issues that are specifically addressed by department structure, and hopefully breaking into some subcommittees to talk about those more directly. But what we can do today is to do the type of brainstorming that you were talking about, Bonnie, of tossing big ideas out there. And I think we were doing some really great brainstorming in the last couple of weeks, mostly on reform-minded subjects. I think we got a lot of really brilliant, dedicated people here. We're all really interested and want to get this work done. And I think this is a really useful structure for a course correction.
Thank you. Almas.
I just wanted to make sure to clarify when you talk about conceptualize, alternative. I'm assuming we're going to look at other states, other countries. I'm assuming that's built into it. I don't know whether people have already started looking at that, but it'd be really nice to gather some materials and talk through some of those issues together as a group, even before the subcommittee part, only because I think it'd be really good for us to. So I'm assuming that's going to be part of this whole thing as far as looking at what other states or other countries are doing.
Yeah, that's always one of the sort of with any of these committees we've got to figure out is what's happening in the subcommittee versus what's happening in the full committee. And we can make those decisions as we move along. I will say that the subcommittee work is what helps committees move faster toward their goal. It can be a lot more difficult when we've got everyone that needs to be involved in every single conversation. The good thing is that these meetings will all be available, the subcommittee meetings, I mean, for folks to watch later if they need to, or so because work is happening in a subcommittee doesn't mean we won't be able to see what work is happening in that subcommittee. The public will, and we certainly will too. So I think the answer, that part is the critical part. I think we do need to focus on analyzing the programs that exist and looking at the issues that police are handling that might be better to be handled in another way. But ultimately, the charge of our task force is exactly what you said, is what are alternative approaches to this? So there's going to be a lot of need for investigation into what people are doing in other parts of the country, but also in other parts of the world. And I also, the idea around conceptualizing is being open to the idea that while there may not be a perfect model we can take from somewhere else and simply implement in Brookline, we actually may be able to be, to pioneer a new way to approach some of these issues. So I don't want to take that off the table. That's why conceptualizing is part of it too. To be able to, for us, this group, to say, we think there might be a better way to do this. We don't have a whole lot of models out there that are addressing these problems in these ways, but we're willing to do the work and come up with something. Okay. Chi-Chi.
Hi, thanks, Raul, and thanks for putting together the remarks, putting together the ideas of the subcommittee and thinking about the structure. I do agree that, there is a need to clarify the charge of this committee and how it interacts with the reform committee. I am a big fan of subcommittees and trying to structure things so that we actually get things done and don't end up just talking a lot. So I'm supportive of that. The one thing I want to make sure that doesn't get lost as we move work into subcommittees is the focus on race. And, the whole reason that so many communities and so many folks are talking about defunding or restructuring or reimagining policing is because of the interactions of police and Black and Brown communities. And that was reemphasized to me looking at the 2018 and 2019 reports and looking at the disproportionate stops and arrests of Black and Brown folks. And so, maybe it'll be inherently there through the work of the subcommittees. Maybe as we talk about shifting functions from police to other types of professionals, mental health, social workers, it'll be there, but I don't want to lose that focus. And part of that may be part of the reason we end up talking about reform elements so much, because, the direct response to issues of police, disproportionate policing of Black and Brown communities is, trainings or policies. And this is going a big step further. But I just want to make sure we keep our eye on that. And then on a very technical point, you mentioned that the subcommittees will have recordings. I just want to make sure they have minutes, because it's much faster to read the minutes than to sit through a recording.
That's a good point. Devin, I believe that's a requirement, right? For one member of the subcommittee to take minutes. Is that right?
Yes.
Right. Yeah, I also want to say, just briefly, I read through for, I don't know what number time this is now, at least the most recent annual report from the police department. And just thinking about what Chichi just shared, I was struck by one line, after having read the whole thing. It says the police department continues to provide a high caliber of police service to the community while ensuring that race and gender bias are not a factor in the delivery of those services. And then, in reading the report, you see the great disparities, and particularly for Black residents and non-residents in terms of stops and arrests and you name it. And so I was surprised to see a line like that, and I think we do have to interrogate that a bit. And at the same time, I'm also mindful that there's work to be done here for the police reform committee, that the select board needs to hold them accountable for that work, and that no one else is out there doing the kind of reimagining work that we need to do that might make our community more safe and livable and free for communities of color, particularly Black residents. So I just keep coming back to, what is the purpose of us being here? Mike.
Yes, thanks, Raul. One thing then I wanted to actually ask about, and Mel may be able to help out with this. The last year, just about almost a year ago, the town meeting authorized the hiring a consultant to look at equity issues and across the town, really, but looking with some focus at the police department. And the search committee talked to, I think there were ultimately 3 finalists, and the person who was chosen is from Texas, and we were a little surprised by the really very high quality of his proposal. That he knew more about Brookline than some of us did in some ways. And so he was engaged before COVID-19 hit. The contract was all put together. That work, if there's some way that we could integrate that work, assuming that it's going to go forward, into what we're doing, I think we can get some extra research power and perhaps some interesting commentary from him. Mel, maybe you can tell me where that stands. Or tell us.
Sure, sure I will. You're referring to the consultant that we just hired. Now, it's not just police. It's a town-wide resource, and the idea is to have somebody on the ground helping us do racial equity work within our departments in the big umbrella of GARE, which is the Government Alliance of Race and Equity, which the town belongs to. So, I think that person could be a resource to the committee. We should explore that. I'll talk to Lloyd Gelano, our Director of Diversity, who's the project manager for that. But again, it's not just police. It's a town-wide approach that will be working in each department, including police.
Right, and the town-wide part is actually what's interesting to me because Bonnie's comment was right on target, saying about we're trying to think about reimagining what the police department does, but the police department, I think there was a reference in there to society at large in effect, and this guy's going to be looking at Brookline at large, and something I've said before is that the police are a mirror of the citizens, and if that mirror gives us back a picture that we don't like, one of the things we have to do is approach, is deal with that. And what I'm hoping is that we'll be able to integrate what he's doing with some of what we're doing to integrate what's out there with the public at large and the impact that it has on the police.
Maybe I could suggest I will send around a little bit of information about the consulting scope of work, a little bit about the company that's been hired. I'll talk to Lloyd Gelano a little bit about this, and we'll see where we go. But generally speaking, we want our consultants and our staff to be resources to our committees. So I would say generally yes. And I see Lloyd is sending some information out there about the company, but we will follow up.
That's great to hear. For those watching at home, what Lloyd's saying on the chat is that Bird Guest from the Racial Equity Group is aware of this process and will attend future meetings. That's terrific. Mel, thank you for that. And Mike, thanks for the question. I'll also note that there should be a community engagement specialist, being hired as well, that'll also work out of Dr. Jono's office. And perhaps that person can be helpful with us as we think through our own community engagement strategy as part of this work. Does that make sense, Mel?
Sure.
Great. Thanks. Eitan.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on the structure you initially set out. I think it's very good. I would say that this kind of builds on what Chi-Chi had been saying, but I think a big part of this task force, probably as opposed to the reform task force, is focusing on public education campaigns to the extent that a lot of what's happening in terms of racial disparities in the field interrogations or whatever, to the extent that that comes from residents calling the police unnecessarily and all that, part of this doesn't seem to be just about the police force itself, but getting buy-in from the community and education to the community about what the police force is supposed to do and what it's not supposed to do.
That makes sense to me. Thanks, Eitan. Anne.
Hi, yeah, I just want to add a little bit to what other folks have been saying. And Bonnie, thank you for opening up the discussion the way that you did, because I agree with what your approach is and what your thoughts are about this process. When I was reading through the materials for today, something that came to my mind was in terms of the difference between reform and a reimagining task forces, is I noticed there's one chart comparing the the budget for the Brookline Police Force compared to other PDs in our local area. And my first thought when I was looking at it is that's useful, possibly more for the reform committee, in my opinion, because it's not so much about us reimagining what our Brookline PD is like. It's more just comparing sort of apples to apples, as far as I'm concerned. Do we spend as much money as Newton? You know, looking at the population, do we spend as much money as Somerville? We may or we may not. That may be good or may not be great, but are we comparing these PDs that are actually doing any of this reimagining work? Or are we just comparing PDs that all need to do this kind of work, and therefore those figures aren't so relevant in terms of at least what I think of as our mission in this task force. Similarly, the racial, the amount of diverse non-white police officers, law enforcement officers in the town of Brookline, to me is not an issue that really concerns me. Because it's not looking at what the police force is as a whole and the kind of work we're trying to do to reimagine it, find conceptualize alternatives to the police force model that we have currently. Because from just my perspective, and like Bonnie, I've done a lot of research into criminal justice reform, abolition. You can have a completely diverse police force, but there's still law enforcement officers, first and foremost, who get trained in a particular type of work and have a particular type of training. And what we're trying to do is look at the whole bucket and see if there's alternative models that we can use to build that are more helpful for the people, our community, people who live and work in this town. That it doesn't really matter to me how diverse the police force is right now, but more what kind of work are they doing and is it working for our town? I do know that there's a fair amount of task force committees in other towns and cities around the United States right now doing reimagining police work. And I think information that we can find from other groups, seeing what other groups are doing who are kind of have a similar mission to what we're doing here, could be very helpful in terms of getting ideas of what people are thinking, how people are thinking of putting alternative organizations or community services in place. And with that, I did watch an hour-long Zoom meeting video of a Reimagining Police Department committee in Rochester, New York, that happened yesterday, that I put on my Facebook page, but I'm happy to share with the group if it's appropriate. Obviously, Rochester is in the middle of their own major situation in terms of the death of one of their citizens at the hands of police officers in March. And so their work was focused around there. Rochester is a lot more diverse population than Brookline is. So there are different aspects of their work compared to what maybe Brookline needs are. But I was really taken by the panel of experts they had and the ideas and thoughts that they had in terms of starting culturally competent public service alternatives to the police force in Rochester. And it gave me hope in terms of what's out there that we can take a look at and perhaps use as, you know, bases for looking at what we need here and how to go forward from there. So I just wanted to mention all that.
And thank you. Before I forget, mindful that not everyone's on Facebook, if you wouldn't mind sharing the link to that video with Devin, we
Yeah.
can get it out to the entire task force. That'd be really helpful.
Yep.
Just briefly, you know, I think your points are well taken. One, that just because a community similarly sized to ours spends X dollars on policing does not mean that we should necessarily. That's the entire purpose of our task force, is to consider alternatives to that. This work also comes at a time, we'll see, I think, next week. But you know, in terms of the particularly the most serious crimes that take place, we have the lowest crime rates in at least the last 2 decades that occurred last year. So this I think this idea around reimagining couldn't come at a better time in terms of the sort of the current state of public safety in Brookline. I'll leave it there. Kristen.
Thanks, Raul. By and large, I'm in favor and supportive of the plan that you laid out. I agree that the framing that you gave us, Bonnie, at the outset is particularly helpful. And I think one of the things that I find myself navigating right now, in many respects, is even related to the language that we're using as a task force. So as a task force, we've talked about reimagining, and we go back and forth between policing and public safety. And I think when we expand ourselves back out to public safety, we put more solutions out on the table. The way that we're thinking about public safety, I think, gives us the option then to say, does that mean mental health professionals, guidance counselors, folks that might not ordinarily appear on a line item or a budget when you're looking only with the frame and the lens of policing? It's particularly striking for me that I can't find a vision for public safety that exists on the Town of Brookline website. And consequently, I can't find a way that the citizens or residents of Brookline had an opportunity to then weigh in on what is a vision for public safety. There are lots of objectives and lots of really detailed points about what it means to execute the functions of particular departments. And those go back and forth, making reference to language around public safety or not. But we've made a bid on what we consider public safety. As I mentioned in the last meeting, it's buildings, fire, and police. And there isn't really anything else that details who came up with that vision and why we're pursuing it in the way that we are. But we don't have to turn over too many rocks because we actually have the framing that's laid out for us. We don't have to continue with it. We can redefine it and go somewhere else. But I think it would be particularly important for us as a group to continue to put the focus on public safety, which may be experienced as policing for a number of folks. But for us then not to continue to dwell down in policing as the only way that we're going to think about delivering on public safety.
Points well taken. Thank you. Bonnie.
I'll keep it quick because I already opened my mouth here. All of that, Kristen, all of that. So I want to say that also going back to a little bit what Anne was saying and what even before that, we were talking about consultants. I think that we will be making a really large mistake if we don't look outside of these institutions and the people that we might regularly use as consultants, because that's not what we're trying to do here. We're not trying to do what the town is already using to think about racial equity and things like that. We're trying to go above and beyond. And it would also, I think, even be disrespectful to not begin to tap into organizations that have been doing this work for years in their own community, doing the really, really important work of community engagement way better than anything we're going to be able to pull off between now and the end of this. To be able to bring them in, organizations like Families for Justice as Healing, which is just in Boston. They're phenomenal. I know we have a small budget. Maybe, I don't know how that works, but maybe we could even invest in some of that information. And yeah, I have notes here around staying away from comparing police departments doing this work with us and comparing maybe instead organizations that are also thinking like us, so that we can lift, like Kristen was saying, up above the idea of policing and stay in public safety. And lastly, I love also this idea of what is our community's vision of public safety, and I know that we are in conjunction with the the reform team in our public hearing, but I would love it if the theme of that public hearing were, what is your vision of public safety? You know, because then that makes that brings a clarity of vision to the public that's coming into this conversation through that public hearing, because I think that's really important to make sure people are clear, so that we as the Reimagining Committee can get people's imaginations really working and their dreams working, instead of just hearing about reform, which will be, you know, most likely the case.
Bonnie, do you think, because I love this, do you think, it seems to me we're going to need, even if that hearing on the 30th was everything we wanted it to be, it seems to me we're going to need more than just that hearing to understand the answer for the Brookline community, this question, what is your vision of public safety? And also, you know, as we do this, always thinking, what is the broad view of the community in Brookline? And then is the view of communities of color in Brookline the same? And how do those two line up or not line up? Because that's part of what we're talking about here, is these disparities, right? So I'm wondering, do you see us as needing a subcommittee, let's say, or whatever form this takes, to help lead that work in terms of basically the work of engaging with the community? What do you think?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that work is going to be so hard. You know, how many people are going to show up for that public hearing? Probably not many. So imagining that one public hearing or a series of a couple public hearings would get like a real information might be remiss.
All right, great. Mike.
Yeah, I just want to follow on to what Bonnie said. I think that's right. That's absolutely correct. That that engagement with the public is important. We can reimagine policing, but if we don't get public understanding of what we're talking about, what we're doing, we won't be successful in bringing any change. I'm going to give you an example of what I'm talking about from the debate at last town meeting about the police budget. I'm on the advisory committee. I got something like 130 emails from people. Some saying reduce the police budget. Some saying just the opposite. It was about 50-50. And a substantial number of the people who said, "Oh no, don't reduce the police budget," were very focused on safety, their safety, from the perspective of them feeling threatened by being surrounded by Boston. You know, that's a code word for thinking about, for them feeling threatened by people who don't look like them. If we don't get the message across, and again, it was 50-50 out of a very substantial number of emails. If we don't get the message across to the public at large, that same sentiment is going to prevent change from occurring, because change ultimately has to go through town meeting, has to go through the community and be accepted. So Bonnie is absolutely right on target, and the idea of getting to work on community engagement from the get-go, I think that's a very valuable thing to do.
It's helpful, thank you. Any other thoughts?
I'm going to put into our, I'll submit, my colleagues at Tufts have been doing a survey of the community in our host communities, Medford and Somerville, about policing. And, you know, I do these kinds of surveys from time to time as well. And I think it'll be useful to see what kind of information they're soliciting, how they're soliciting feedback, both from white and non-white residents, to try to get people's handles on this. It's not particularly expensive to do these kinds of mail surveys, and sometimes you can get better feedback that way. So I'm going to get the questionnaire, get a sense of what they asked, and send that around.
please let us know. Reminder: there is some funding available for our work. I'm not eager to use it just to use it, but if there are certain costs, like distributing a high quality survey that's going to produce workable results for us or usable results for us, that may be one of those areas where we can spend a few bucks. So, thanks, Malcolm.
Thanks, Raul. I think I'm personally struggling sort of in where I'm making my own line between reform versus reimagining. And I can see that's the personal mindset of where I think to go. But one of the things I'm particularly curious about in thinking about imagining is sort of whole community public safety. So I never truly consider myself a part of public safety, but I've often been told, like, if I were to go on strike as a public school teacher, part of the reason I legally can't do that is a public safety issue, right? That like, then there'd be kids unsupervised. And so I think about, things in Brookline that don't exist for kids that perhaps facilitated public safety. So one of my mentors, football coach who was head of Brookline Rec, Bobby Lynch, used to talk about how when he was a little kid in Brookline, there would be high school kids at playgrounds with balls and all kinds of other stuff to help facilitate kids who could just go and play during the summer. And we no longer have that. We do have some things that, started in the 80s and I couldn't justify as a kid why they started. I think I could probably justify in my mind. I don't want to do that. But in the 80s, we started to have essentially, college kids do some enforcement around playgrounds. And they were sort of interns to the police. I don't know, Chief Hilaire can speak more to that. And he doesn't really have to. It's really the point of that shift in what we saw about public safety, right? Whereas before we had people who were there to help facilitate kids and play and monitor in that way, as opposed to having more enforcement to say, make sure kids weren't staying in the playgrounds after dark, which is posted in every playground in Brookline. I think about other things like when I was, a student at what is now the Ridley School, there used to be a bus in the winter that would pick us up and bring us to Lars Anderson to skate all afternoon and drop us back off. And it was free. And my brother and I would go do it and we'd come back. Well, to me, that could be seen as public safety, right? Like that could be seen as an opportunity for kids. And what I don't really know is how intertwined all those things are as a town, in particular when it comes to what Michael is saying from a budgetary standpoint, as well as a public safety standpoint. Because to get a bus that's gonna go to all the public schools and drop kids off, that costs money. Somebody's gotta, do something to release time with Lars Anderson and make sure there's not hockey practice. All that stuff costs, right? And so it's thinking about where we're placing our costs, right? And I use that other example, not so much to think about enforcement, but somewhere along the line in Brookline, the cost of having a teenager at a playground all day and paying that teenager to have kids, and kids were trusted to walk to playgrounds and play because they knew there was supervision, shifted over some course of time to paying, high school graduates and college kids to then enforce, make sure kids aren't doing stuff in playgrounds after dark. Somewhere that shifted, and I don't know how to shift that back. I don't know if that means like police and rec and others have to be together in that. I'm not saying police and rec don't work together, because I actually know they do. But, again, I'm struggling is that I think of that as reimagining, right? But it's actually not reimagining. it's refocusing, you know what I mean? And so, I'm just struggling with all that as well as just some of my own normal tendencies. We hear a lot about police training. And my thing is, as an educator, well, how do you know the training worked? I've gone to loads of conferences and missed school, and sometimes on taxpayer dollars and sometimes on my own, and walked out with nothing. It did not change my practice one bit. And so, yeah, so those types of things in my mind, I'm struggling to say, which side of the fence that lands. And yeah, just frankly, I need some help. And I'm really interested in thinking about like sort of a wholesale public safety for the town of Brookline.
Yeah, I think what you described fully falls within the scope of our work. In particular, we don't have a member of the school committee or school administration within the charge of the task force, but I can't imagine us doing this work without engaging with them as part of our work. So just based on what you said, I can imagine this task force making recommendations. The school line item is in terms of expenditures the largest one in our town budget, right? And to think about if a community concern is keeping kids safe, keeping kids on the right track, getting them to graduation, then that should be reflected in our school budget. In some ways it is. And maybe this task force will say not enough, and there's more we can be doing to support the work that the schools are doing, as well as places like the Brookline Teen Center and elsewhere. And maybe that's part of our recommendation. In reading the annual report for the police department, we see that it seems the police are doing some of that work. Does this body think that that's the appropriate organization within the town to be focused on that? I don't know, but I think that's something that we should be discussing and should end up in our reporting. Does that make sense, Malcolm?
Yeah, it does. I just think within my own brain capacity, I struggle to figure where to fit things in within that realm. And so, yeah, I wanted to voice what I was thinking, but also voice that I think it's actually hard at times. If you want to get to really granular ideas, like to not move into reform sometimes.
Right. Yeah, I think it's natural that we get drawn in that direction. Also, it's really compelling because there are, I think folks in this task force in particular recognize that there are issues that we see that we'd like to address. We had discussed at the select board level ensuring that there were at some regular intervals joint meetings between our task force and the reform committee. We haven't yet decided when that first meeting will happen. I think we've both got work to do in organizing our own affairs first. But I do know that that's something that we're supposed to do, and that I think is smart for us to do at some point. Our first foray into that, of course, is going to be the September 30th joint public hearing. Although we won't be doing a lot of talking, we'll be doing a whole lot of listening. But we'll make sure to plan some opportunity for us to engage with them directly, particularly areas where we have overlap or we have concerns too. Bonnie.
I wanna make sure that I'm not oversimplifying all the great thoughts that you just had, Malcolm, because I love them. I wrote them all down as fast as I could. But when you say that it's hard to draw the line between reform and reimagining, what if you just remove what happens when you remove the police officer collaboration there? What's left? What needs to be caught? And maybe that is an oversimplification, and we'll see. But also you talked about money and that costing money, and that was what with the shifting money from the police department to social services. That's the whole idea of that. So let's say we decide that the school resource officer is not something we want to keep. That's a whole bunch of money that we can now put into busing kids to the ice skating rink. You know what I mean? And also that's very simple and probably obvious, but I just want to make sure that those are said. Like when we talk about issues with money, that's exactly it. We're investing all of our money into policing as a solution, when here we can dissolve some of that and move that money into unarmed, out of the police department solution that would be so much more I don't know, inspiring. And like thinking about kids at a playground being paid to be there to support the children, to let my daughter go down the street to the park because there's balls and a whole community out there, that brings me joy. It doesn't make me feel safe that there's an officer, not that there is, that's not how it works, but you know what I mean? The difference between those two is exactly it. That's it.
Thanks, Bonnie. I'll just also note, which also may be obvious, but I just want to also note that that I know I am, and I'm sure others are as well, concerned not just about the engagement of police with people who have a Brookline address, but also those folks who are passing through Brookline, right? And so as we think about this, I'm fully on board with everything Malcolm and Bonnie just said in terms of supporting our own youth here in Brookline. But as we think about youth more broadly, because I've been conceptualizing this as engagement with schools, but maybe a different way to conceptualize it is engagement with youth, period, which includes youth in Brookline as well as outside of Brookline. But obviously, for our purposes, a strong focus on schools and other social services for kids within town. Anne.
Yeah, I just, Malcolm, what you said just resonated with me so much and reminded me of a couple of years ago, there was a community interest in opening up basketball courts at the Pierce Park, the Pierce Playground, for kids, youth at night. And I just remember there was a very, very, very strong backlash from parts of the Brookline community about that, saying things along the lines of, well, that will bring in people from neighboring towns and that will become a potentially dangerous situation. So that just occurred to me as you were talking about your experiences on the courts as a kid and having more outside and community activities for kids, that we have some work to do in this town around what that would mean. And, you know, try to work with people who are resistant to that. Like, I think was it Mike was saying about folks in our community who are worried about community safety vis-a-vis we're surrounded on 3 sides by Boston. And I wonder how, it's something we should look into, how many people in our community actually feel that way, vis-a-vis how many people in our community who do feel that way tend to write emails when stuff like this comes up. There may be a very small vocal part of our community who's concerned about that, or maybe it is a much larger part of our community that we need to hear from and try to find a way to work with their concerns as well as provide community safety approach in Brookline that may in fact mean people from other communities around us, Boston, coming in and being part of our community. So I wanted to bring that up, and I had something else that I guess I'll come back to if I can remember. But we have I think engaging the community in this process is incredibly important. I think surveys are one way of doing that. I think possibly focus groups would be another, trying to get people actively engaged in this process as much as possible, because without community input and without community support, this work is meaningless. And we need to reach out as much as we can.
Thank you, Anne. I appreciate those comments. You know, I'm just briefly, and I know we've got a few folks in the queue. This is an important point I think Ann's making, and Eitan mentioned earlier, is really getting folks to understand, their engagement related to others in our community, particularly communities of color. I'm thinking, for instance, about signage in our through Parks and Rec at some of our facilities. I noticed recently that, and this is being addressed, by the way, I'll say at the onset, is that there was a sign behind the Ridley School by the basketball court that said no profanity allowed, and directly next to it was the tennis court, and no such requirement is listed in their rules and regulations. As someone who's not particularly good at any sport, I can assure you that if I'm going to curse on a basketball court, I'm probably going to curse a whole lot more on a tennis court, because I'm worse at that sport, if anything. But this is one of those things when asked, why is that listed on the basketball court but not on the tennis court? The answer is, well, what gets listed on these signs is generated by the community, and the community say I've got a problem here, and that is community says I have a problem, and that turns into policy, right? And what we need is some kind of filtering system where we say we get your concerns here, but if the concerns are around profanity, the concerns either are for every one of our facilities where profanity might occur, or for none of them. So that was a mistake in policy in the past, one that's being corrected. That line about profanity at the basketball court is actually being taken off, and we need to really do what Eitan said in terms of educating our community about the dangers of using either police or other town departments as a tool to sort of create the world that they want to live in, and really understand the impact that might have on others who also live in our community. And so I just wanted to share that brief story myself. Mike, why don't you go briefly, please? And then Chi-Chi and Kristen, and I want to start to, if we're good with this approach, which it seems that we generally are, I'd like to start really digging a little bit deeper into an initial conversation. We don't need to fully decide today, but about what some of the focus areas we think, what some of the areas we should be focusing on. Mike.
So again, on the theme of community engagement, Ann's comment about a survey, I think, and other people, I think a survey is a great idea. And I think we have some pretty good volunteer talent that can put in town that has done some survey work for other parts of the sort of volunteer government that can do this very effectively. The comment about focus groups is a really interesting one. I think that we would be surprised and probably shocked at what comes out of focus groups with some parts of the community. And it's really important that we know about that, because if you don't know about it, there's no way to address it. So to the extent that we can possibly do that, perhaps in conjunction with the consultant is coming up to look at equity as a whole in the town, because there is, I believe there in his plan, there are some focus group. There's an intent to have some focus groups, and sort of integrate that, make use of some of those funds, in effect, for two purposes. I think that'd be very, very useful.
Great. Also, let's always keep in mind the timeline that we're on right now. Our final recommendations at this point are due first week of February, which gives us October, November, December, January, February, 5 months to complete our work. And as part of that is a winter break, is Thanksgiving, or numerous other holidays that'll be taking place as well. So just being mindful of whatever strategy we decide that we want to employ here, that the clock is ticking, and that it's important that we get to it. So I'm all for a survey personally. I do think that that the faster we figure out what that looks like, who it is that we're trying to survey, how that's distributed, and what how we analyze whatever data we get. We've got to start thinking sooner about that than later. Eitan.
Yeah, I can talk about whenever you're ready about how much it would cost, what it would look like, how long it would take. So whenever you think it's a good time, we can do that.
Okay, let's do that. Let's do that soon, actually. Let's get Chi-Chi, Kristen, Almas here, and then we'll circle back to you, Eitan.
Okay.
You're good.
Okay. Thanks, Raul. First of all, I wanted to say I think this discussion is brilliant. It's great. I've really appreciated it, and I want to make sure that we continue to have these space for conversations like this in these meetings, even though we're moving to a subcommittee structure. What has really struck me about this conversation, we know that suburban communities where there's not a lot of Black and brown residents, there's this tendency to call the police or have disproportionate focusing when you have a Black or brown person just walking around, being, doing whatever they're doing. It seems to be heightened in Brookline because there seems to be this mentality, we are surrounded by Boston, and therefore we are constantly under threat. And I wonder if that is a factor in some of what goes on around here. I think a survey is a great idea. Community engagement, obviously, public engagement is really important, and we should definitely do that. I think the harder step after the survey is then educating and engaging with the public to push back on some of the implicit racism that leads to people calling the police on Black and brown folks just going about their business in Brookline. And my concern always is in any of these efforts, we're preaching to the choir. The folks that sent the emails to Mike Sandman saying, oh no, don't defund, don't reduce the police budget because all these hordes of people are going to just come into Brookline. They're probably not the ones watching right now. And even if we do survey them, we're going to do all this great work. At the end of the day, are they going to stop calling the police just because a bunch of Black or brown teenagers is, having a good time making a lot of noise in a park?
Good question. Thank you. Kristen.
Yeah, related to what I think I hear Chi-Chi saying, I think if you heard my advocacy that we widen the lens, using your term, Raul, about widening the lens, but if we're widening the lens to talk about public safety, then I think implicit in that question is safety for what and safety from what. And I think that, as I think I hear from Chi-Chi, that the fact that there may be folks who have this vision of safety from something, I think it's particularly important for us to know that that's out there, and that as we construct that vision of public safety, we can peg those concerns against, this is the vision that we've constructed as a community. And to Mike's point, I don't think I would be surprised to hear some of the things that are in this town, because I think we live and experience them on a regular basis. So there's probably not a lot that would ultimately surprise me about it. But those perspectives are out there anyway, and they end up manifesting as police calls, community friction, whatever. So I think it would be important for us to continue to keep that frame on what are we trying to provide safety for, and there are folks who want safety from, but ultimately our ability to construct a vision that says, this is what we are trying to co-create for public safety is going to be particularly important that we establish and make sure it's regularly communicated.
Safety for what? Safety from what? Thanks, Kristen. Almas.
Yeah, I'm just also agreeing that this conversation has been wonderful so far. I just wanted to comment on, the community engagement piece, surveys, focus groups, and I'm trying to wrap my head around like, okay, so how are we gonna, if we're gonna break up into subcommittees, like is each subcommittee gonna do this, or we're gonna try to figure out a way to, get all these different pieces? Because for focus groups, it's like focused on one particular topic. So it's like, okay, is that subcommittee going to do that piece? I know this is probably iterative and it'll evolve as we go along, but I just want to get that out there. Like, we need to think about what's the best way. Is it, is it focus groups to start with, and then you figure out, okay, this is the survey we want to do based on that, or so again, I don't have answers. I just want to put that out there so we're thinking about what's the best way.
It's a great question, and I imagine it'll probably be iterative. Although I wonder, in the notes I'm taking down, one of the things that we don't, I think there is like a whiteboard function in Zoom. I'm not good at it yet, so I'm not going to use it. Maybe one day, Devin and I could play around with that and maybe use it for a future meeting. But just so you know, what I've got written down in my notepad is now, in addition to what I mentioned before, a group that's focused on envisioning. I've put in that bucket, the survey that we've talked about, potentially focus groups, and that may also be so. And I've probably got some other notes in my pad elsewhere, but I think it's important to engage in faith communities, and there's already a group where we can partner with to do that. So Brookline Interfaith Community. I know Almas is very much involved. That's how we met in the first place. And engage in the BHA community, the Brookline Housing Authority community. Engage in a conversation about the relationship between schools and public safety, and there could be others. So I think there's an opportunity for, whether or not we call them forums or focus groups or something of the like, that'll benefit individual subcommittees, but likely that'll cut across, because our lives aren't lived in just one place. That'll cut across multiple subcommittees and will benefit the work of all. So I could imagine an envisioning, let's say, subcommittee that focuses essentially on community engagement as part of this work that benefits the work of the entire task force. In addition to that department level analysis group, multiple groups doing program analysis, and potentially issue analysis. I obviously mental health, and I would include people who are unhoused and may have mental health issues as part of that too. Might be one of those groups, but there may be others, and so that's what I'm thinking right now. It seems like there's general agreement in terms of this approach, and out of this conversation came this idea of folks specifically focused on envisioning and community engagement. Let me see. We're actually making pretty good time. Good job, y'all. Let's bring Eitan back in to talk about what a survey might look like, and also I want to start to maybe list out. We don't need to. I'm going to write them in pencil. This is a pen, but I'm going to write them in pencil today. Potentially, what some of those subgroups might be. But I want us to be able to also take some time to think about what might be missing, or if we want to make some changes between now and maybe when we meet again next. So just know that whatever we discuss right now isn't written in stone. Eitan.
Sure. So this is based on surveys I've done in the past, but also a survey going on right now that's in the process that was developed by a colleague of mine, with questions actually mostly written by exclusively a group of students of color at Tufts for the Medford and Somerville communities. So the basic structure would be, you draw from the town census file to make sure not only you have a representative sample, but probably oversample precincts or residents in affordable housing units or whatever. You have some kind of oversample of communities that are particularly of interest. Something like soliciting 25,000 solicitations. Something like a postcard basically goes out by mail with a link to an online survey. So you get about a 20% response rate like that, 15-20% response rate. So we would get, if we sent 25,000 of these out, we would get 4,000 or 5,000 responses. People can take it, on their phone or on their computer. Obviously, the benefit of doing it that way is that we get the results in a easily, we don't have to convert from paper survey results to a computer. This is all kind of through Qualtrics. So basically, depending on how exactly we did the process, by the way, it would cost about total would cost probably about $1 per solicitation. So 25,000 solicitations would cost about $25,000. You could do it maybe a little cheaper. Yeah, my experience is people basically respond fairly quickly, like within a couple of weeks, if they're going to respond at all. Obviously, you can kind of do it fancier and more expensive by sending out additional requests to people who didn't fill it out. There's one, I mean, I haven't even asked my colleague about this, but it's very interesting that we could potentially use exactly the same survey that's happening in Medford and Somerville, the same questionnaire, and we would learn a lot from how our community is similar or different to those communities. You know, the questionnaire is about a 10 to 15 minute set of questions about people's perceptions of the police, their experience with the police, good and bad. So that's where we are. I would say there's, you know, right now, I just checked with my colleague. I can't share publicly the questionnaire because it's currently going through the university review process. But I could ask him if he wanted to add our community to that, and then they would have kind of the university oversight. Otherwise, we could just do it on our own, of course, and not go through any academic red tape, but just have a similar survey ourselves. We would just need basically the census file. I could do the sampling stratification strategy and Qualtrics. I don't know if the town has an account for that, but you know, and we basically send a mailer saying fill out the online survey.
Yeah, I mean, in principle, that sounds good. I think the this is one of the devil's in the details in terms of exactly what's in the questionnaire and whether it you know, this group feels like it meets our needs. So I guess I imagine at some point you know, before going down that road, we'd need to see it. That makes sense?
Yeah, so that's, yes. So I cannot share that on a confidential basis with this committee, correct? I cannot do that.
Michael Downey, this is your moment to shine.
This is the moment to step in. Yeah. What do you mean you can't share that on a confidential basis? What does that mean?
In other words, I think because this is still going through potential changes and through the university process, this is, by the way, what I'm talking about is the questionnaire that's being developed for Medford and Somerville. I don't think I can share that. I mean, I know I cannot share that in a way that's going to be just a public document.
Yeah, you're right on that. If you're sharing it within the group, it's, you know, we can't kind of seal it as a confidential document. It would be a public record.
Is there any exception for like notes, you know, like basically preliminary?
You know, there is actually, and that's a good question, actually, and I'm glad you raised that point. There is an exception under the public records law for perhaps data like that would be kind of like a proprietary data. So I could look into that as to whether you sharing it, but I'm not sure it would apply in this sense because it's not necessarily the town's proprietary data. It would be
the exception I'm looking for is like works in progress, and you know, a planning document that is not, you know, that is in the works, so that we would be looking at it. Is there
I don't think, you know, I'm thinking more about like a proprietary document that would be, you know, I don't think that would be like a planning document, something that's in the planning stages. But also then I'm thinking about the concern, even if that were, let's just say, you know, something that's in the planning stages, I don't know if that would relieve the town or this group, you know, in terms of an exception under the public records law, because it's not this group's or the town's document, if that makes sense. So I'd have to look into that a little bit more. But my first answer, you know, my first thought is that it wouldn't be confidential, but I can look into that and try to provide a more concrete answer. Yeah. Hopefully my stepping in worked out this time. Yeah.
Eitan, one of the things too that I'd be curious about, it may be that we that maybe a couple of us get a chance to look at this, or the entire task force does, and we say, hey, this is a great instrument. It actually does meet a lot of our needs, and there are a few questions that it doesn't ask that we'd like to have asked in our community. And I guess maybe a question for you to take back to that group at Tufts is whether or not the possibility exists for us to add maybe some Brookline specific questions.
Right. So let me just ask one follow-up question. So the two routes here is to see if we want to kind of contribute money that it would cost and have our thing run in parallel with those others, or the route is rather that we just use that survey as a useful starting point just because it's out there in the world and go it ourselves. I don't have a strong inclination about what the right thing to do here for us is, but maybe one thing is easier versus the other in terms of the administrative process.
Yeah, I don't have, I might need some time to think about that myself. Yeah, I'm not inclined one way or the other, at least at the moment. If I am inclined in one direction, I guess it would be to partner with other communities to create data that's useful for all of us. I guess I'm inclined in that direction, but maybe we can do some more research and figure out what the right approach is. Yeah. All right, lots of hands. Bonnie.
Hey, I'm curious about the anonymity of these surveys because obviously it's going to be an issue. Policing is a dangerous issue for a lot of communities to be very frank and honest about. And there's probably a lot of hesitation from people. I'm curious about that, but also I know there's, maybe 20% of people respond, but I think that to get real responses, and this may be moving ahead of the game, but need more than just a survey to get like the information, like the feel of what's happening. And the difference between a place like Brookline and a place like Somerville, which are very different communities. So I just want to put that nuance out there that what we're looking for specifically is Brookline. Mm-hmm. And so building trust within this community, which would be part of that working group, I understand, is going to be essential to get real information rather than just a survey. And also, I know there's a bunch of other surveys going through BHA regarding this content and other content. So we should also think about that. Over surveying BHA is going to be a problem, I think.
Yeah, I mean, without question, this would need to be an anonymous survey, without question. I see Eitan shaking his head, yes. And yeah, and I agree. Then this is where I think focus groups, even one-on-one interviews, any other way, I think we'll have to come up with a community engagement strategy for our particular task force. But it's got to involve a number of different modalities, no question about it. Malcolm.
Thanks. I guess I have a sort of split question for Eitan, Raul. I wonder about electronic distribution and if that's possible, and would that perhaps shave some money off? And then Raul, could it be cooperatively facilitated? So like asking steps to success to help filter to families in public housing. And I know steps, a lot of the advisors use text. And so if they had a link and they got it from a trusted person, they might be more willing to fill it out than if they got a mailer, right? Maybe working with Brookline Rec that serves a lot of families. And I just don't know, I guess, Eitan, if it's possible to actually use to like sort of, enhance efforts electronically. And then I guess, Raul, is it beyond this committee's breadth to reach out to others to help distribute?
Eitan?
Yeah, I'll say two things. First on I think in terms of anonymity, or, I think one benefit of going through a university is, you have the official institutional review board, it's confirming if people have any questions, there's a number to call and all that. I mean, we could basically set up a structure like that without that. There are a lot of ways to make it, I would say, more accessible or get the word out more. I think that will just unfortunately probably add time. So I think there's probably a balance here. Usually, my experience on these surveys is, you get a pretty representative group, even if you're only getting 15 to 20%, and basically how you're unrepresentative. In other words, enough about what the population is that you surveyed versus who actually sends something back to know exactly, what the basic biases are. But yeah, I mean, I think that it's pretty. I think it's kind of complicated if you were to do a randomized male survey and then do a lot of non-randomized parts and you have to figure out, like, okay, well then when I see the whole data, do I understand what I'm being representative of? So I don't. I think it could add some trickiness to it, but we could do it. I mean, it really depends on what we're looking for. I do think that it makes sense to have both of these approaches. I think getting 4,000 people to give us their take on this, on these questions, it's something we can't get from opt-in focus groups. But from focus groups, we'll get stuff we can't get from this. So I just think these are just both tools in a toolkit. And look, I'm actually not even pushing the survey thing if we don't need to do it, but I just think it is something we could do in this time frame with a little bit of money, and we would come out with some, I think, pretty clear data about, especially on race, what white residents and non-white residents, or by neighborhood, what folks in different neighborhoods think about the police, their expectations about the police, their level of comfort with the police. I think we could get that pretty quickly, and that what I think that really does inform is essentially to what extent this is actually a public relations or a public education issue we're facing versus the balance of that versus the police department itself. My hunch, and it sounds like other people's hunches too, might be there's a lot of work to be done on public education. And I think one of the goals of the survey is to say to test that intuition.
Mhm.
I'll just add that I think if there is a link that either a Brookline specific link or a link that's a general link that's being shared on these postcards, I don't see why we couldn't also leverage partnerships that already exist to help increase the response rate through steps, through the teen center, through potentially Parks and Rec and others. We'd of course have to work with the town administrator and relevant departments to do anything on the town side, and then partner with some of the social service organizations and others more directly as part of our work. So that seems within scope and also not particularly onerous either. To partner with those folks to do it. We've got these relationships. We should leverage them, especially if they're going to result in higher turnout from populations that we unfortunately don't engage with enough, and don't have those usual pathways of getting feedback from. So that makes sense to me. Okay, I've got Chi-Chi and Ann, and then I want to start. Well, let's see what Chi-Chi and Ann have to say. They might take us in an even better direction. Go for it.
No, sorry, I'm still going to talk about the survey.
Yeah.
I had a question, and then related to that question, some thoughts. So the question is, with respect to this issue of confidentiality, maybe if Eitan could tell us what the timeline is looking like for this survey to come out of the Institutional Review Board review, and it might be a moot point if it's coming out in a few weeks. Out of that process so that it could be publicly shared. And the reason I think it'd be good for us to look at the questions, or maybe Eitan, you can answer this now, is I'm wondering if it will address some of the questions we have about, it seems like some of the survey will be about the participants' experience with the police and attitudes. But I wonder if it will get to some of the issues we're talking about here, where you've got a mostly non-Black and brown community, and sort of their implicit bias in terms of, oh, this person doesn't belong here, I'm going to call the police, kind of issue. I don't even know how to term that properly, but if it doesn't, maybe we still want to use this survey because we don't have a long time frame, and it is easier just to use a pre-existing survey. But I want to make sure that we're sort of cognizant of what our wants are, how they would fit into a pre-existing survey.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I would just say for one thing that Medford and Somerville are not the same kind of communities themselves. And so I think that that kind of sensitivity is probably already baked into the product. What I would suggest is seeing, so they're going to go to the field next month. That's the plan, about a month from now. And so again, they would have results probably by, early November. So one option is for me to just approach that group and say, is it even theoretically possible to add another community? What would that look like? And if it is possible, then I think we have the conversation of like, how can we get access to those survey questions to make sure it works? My guess is if we started making large amendments to the survey, which would then have to go back to the institutional review board, it would be a different process. And if it is not a possibility, or it doesn't make sense for us after we look at the questionnaire, then we can take additional steps. But I think first is maybe just finding out, is that theoretically possible, and then we can obviously have some chance to look at what's going on over there. But like, I don't know budgetarily whether it's possible. I don't know if it's the commission wants it. I don't know if the town wants it. So there's I think a whole bunch of decisions that have to be made about that.
All right, thanks, Chi-Chi. Anne, and then Mike.
Yeah, so on the same subject of the survey, I think it sounds like a really interesting survey, and it would be great to have Brookline be part of that database. But what I'm hearing, first, I'd like to know more about specifically what the survey is trying to accomplish. And maybe you said this early on and I just zoned out and missed it. But if it's just about folks' perceptions and experiences with the police, I'm not convinced that that's the mission of this particular task force. I would be more interested in finding out from our community their thoughts and feelings about reimagining the police, not so much what their experiences have been with the police department to date, but what their thoughts about what might be different and might be more workable for Brookline. So that feels to me like a completely different survey. I am by no means ATON, but I've done a number of surveys myself. And I wonder if we couldn't just put together a quick and dirty survey committee or do it as part of the whole group and come up with the types of questions that we as this group are interested in learning more about from the community, and just do our own survey, maybe even be able to get it out sooner and get data back faster. And then maybe also contribute to the survey that Tufts is doing down the line. I'm just wondering, in terms of the mission of our group, how the Tufts survey kind of matches up with what we're tasked to be doing here.
It's a fair question, and yeah, we'll need to. It's a fair question. We just and again, devil's in details what those questions are. I will say this in terms of relative to constructing our own survey is I don't know that there's a such thing as quick and effective survey construction. You start getting into the wording of questions, and is this going to get us the right response we want? And I can see multiple meetings where a group of folks are trying to figure out what the exact right questions are to ask our community.
Absolutely. But there may also already be surveys out there by other groups doing reimagining police type of work that we could build on. So
I would just say, because I'm looking at the server right now and it's frustrating, I can't just send it to all of you, but I think you'll be pretty happy with it. There's a very wide range of questions, including about whether the budget of these police forces should be increased or decreased, about what happens, whether social workers should be more heavily relied on in certain situations. I think there's a lot of themes of the survey that are kind of consistent with the stuff we've been talking about. And I will, yeah, I wish I could just send this to you. It's frustrating.
Actually, if I know that there are people holding, have their hands raised, and I
But Mike,
apologize for jumping ahead, but if so, the question for me is whether, the question that was, proposed or posed to me was whether you could share it and and keep it a confidential document. But for you, you just mentioned that you do have access to it. You're seeing it right now, but do you have to get permission on your end to actually share it with this group before you're able to do that, or?
Yeah, I'm told I can't share it in a way that, just with the group?
Yeah, just with the group, you'd be able to share it. Like you have that permission at this time.
I have to double check that, but my guess is my guess is probably yes. I know that what I've been told is I can't share it in a public way, but I bet I could share it.
Yeah, just the reason why I ask is I was just looking quickly going through the exemptions to the public records law. I did find one that perhaps does apply. I'll have to look at it more closely and kind of do a little bit more research, but there is an exemption that may apply. So I can get back to the group or to Raul with a more concrete answer as I stated.
Great. Yeah, that'll be helpful. And Michael, also, if well, I hope members of the public understand that the difficulty that we're in this situation, and that what we're trying to do is to effectively understand their perceptions and their beliefs and their needs, and so hopefully members of the public will be be as generous as possible in letting us figure our way through this. But I'm wondering, Michael, also, and if you need more time to think this through as well, that's fine. But whether or not maybe a couple of members of the task force may be able to, with the permission of the researchers at Tufts, of course, be able to take a look at the questions and then report back our thoughts to the task force as well. So I don't know if that's also a possibility.
Yeah, I'm just and that brings me to a conversation that we had the other night about subcommittees and whether that would be. Yeah, so that so I have a couple. All right, so I have that question to look into as well. But
yeah,
all right, because that's the thing. Like a subcommittee is any multi-member body or multi-member group that reports back, recommendations back to the public body, which is this committee, and that's subject to the open meeting law. So that's just another consideration.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Michael. Mike.
I want to clarify what I think we should be looking for with the survey or any other instrument that we use to try and get public input. We're certainly looking for a sense of what people of color have experienced and what their attitudes are. I would say it's very important to get the rest of the community, which represents 85% of the population, something like that. If you include minorities broadly, Asian Americans and as well as African Americans, being a relatively small group, it's very important to get that because that 85%. Well, I mean that's the vast majority, and budgeting and town government and town meeting respond to that group. But there are two purposes to this. One is so that we know what attitudes are, but also so that we can show the community what its attitudes are. And if we can shine a light on attitudes that people look at and say, oh my God, if that's what I sound like, there's something wrong, that would be a very valuable contribution to make. What we're doing here and trying to reimagine, we may come forward, hopefully we will, with some specific things to do, but then they have to get done. And without community support from the 85% to do them, they're not going to happen. So explaining to people what they themselves are thinking is a very valuable thing that we could do.
All right, thanks, Mike. Alexander.
So I've also been sort of sitting back during this discussion of the survey because I agree with Anne. I'm concerned about the utility of pouring a lot of time and energy into this survey. One thing that's troubling to me, and it may just be that this is the way the world works and I'm cranky about it. One thing that's troubling to me is the perceived need for reliance on hard data for things that are obvious. And I know that a certain amount of that is really helpful, right? In terms of a lot of my family is very scary, racist white people who don't necessarily think they're racist, right? I see you there, Bonnie. And when presented with data like this, where they come out with, oh, here's a survey response of actually racism isn't in the past, here it is right now, they're very shocked and are then prepared to take certain steps. And that's a good thing. But I'm not sure that it's necessarily part of the work of reimagining. I think that that's something that's very useful for the town of Brookline to get invested in. And where we're talking about hiring consultants in order to work on engagement around issues of racism in the town, I think that's something the town of Brookline should be working on. I'm not sure that it's that useful for what we're doing. Because, and I was thinking also about your comment, Mike, of explaining people's views to themselves. I think it's very important to solicit what people want out of this committee, and that's what the public meetings are going to be about. I don't perceive the public meetings, and maybe I'm misconstruing what you're saying here. Feel free to tell me if I am. I don't construe those public meetings as us educating the public about what we're doing, but rather as a space for them to tell us what we should do.
Right.
And I think, yeah.
About is what happens after we report. What happens, because we're not going to change the budget ourselves. We're not going to change priorities. We're not going to change town structure. What we do will hopefully contribute to changes and
absolutely
hopefully be the theme that gets followed. But unless there's a public understanding and acceptance of what we're saying, it ain't going to happen.
I completely agree with that. And I think there's a lot of need to do some persuasion work. But I'm not sure that a survey is the best way to tackle that, right? Of like getting buy-in and getting people on board and doing some persuasion work for people who are like, yeah, you know, you guys created this committee. I'm not yet convinced it's necessary. That's going to be part of our job, I think. I don't want to get so bogged down in that part of our job that we don't actually reimagine.
Eitan, I see you want to jump in on this conversation.
Yeah, I just want to say that there's a widespread in the whole country, people misperceive the public as being more conservative than it is on a number of issues. If we have survey data that shows that people of all races and neighborhoods in this town, they see the budget of the police and they want to reduce it, and then we present anything to the public or to town meeting or to the select board, say, look how widespread this opinion is, that people want to reduce the budget of the police office, or look, in all of these different scenarios, dealing with homelessness, dealing with domestic abuse issues, the public prefers that the police are not the primary response. I mean, having data like this is really important because the alternative is people's guesses about what the public wants, and people tend to guess very wrong. And so I would just say that I think going forward, we're going to find a lot of survey data that helps us both learn what the public thinks, but also helps to convey, and I think maybe this is what Mike was saying, helps to convey that there's actually a wider spread support for a lot of things that we're interested in potentially than it might seem if we're just like using our hunches or asking the police department if they think they should reduce their budget.
Well, I'll just jump in and just say also what we're talking about, I think, in the larger scope, if we pull back a little bit, is using multiple data points. What we get from this survey will be one or a number of data points, but over-reliance on a survey or over-reliance on a focus group or over-reliance on an interview or over-reliance on a forum is ill-advised, and that we're going to need to take the larger view when we collect all of these data in all these different ways, to really think about what it means collectively, not just looking at one individual question, for instance, on a survey. So this is I think it's important to do this, and at the same time, I don't think that the results of this survey should be the end all be all of our perception of this work or community needs, if that makes sense to folks. I'm mindful that of two things. One, we've got 13 minutes and I've got 3 people in the queue. Let's run down the queue and then see where we are at that point. Almas, go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll be quick. So I'm just listening to the issues about survey and the difficulties, and somebody said there's things out there that people have already done, and I'm wondering whether 1 or 2 people from the committee can look at the internet, like what's been done, what are the surveys. I just saw something from Pure Research that did it. There's tons of stuff out there on police reimagining. So if we're all going to try to do it, it doesn't seem efficient, but 1 or 2 people look and sort of gather the information, whatever they can find, bring it back to the committee. And then we have perhaps some targeted focus groups if we decide to do that on specific topics that come out of that. Again, there's so much stuff out there, as somebody else suggested, and I just want to say that perhaps we should have a couple of people look at that.
I agree. Kristen.
I will also be brief. I wanted to revisit a comment that I made earlier in talking about public safety from and public safety for. And I don't think that what we're after is trying to enable the public safety from the things I feel threatened about. I think what we're, and similarly, I think that regardless of how much evidence we marshal about attitudes and perspectives, what will make a difference is when we put alternatives on the table that people can use, so that you don't call the police in the instance that you feel that whatever degree of public safety from, if we give you a different mechanism, or we ask the town to put on the table different mechanisms that can be used, then it's less a matter of trying to change people's attitudes and giving them something that they can do differently that doesn't replicate a structure that serves all of us in an ill way.
Yeah, I'm really, and I know we're going to, I think, start to see some of this maybe next week. But I'm really interested in the protocols that our dispatchers use, in particular when they get a call, to determine what is a police matter, what's not a police matter. And I don't know that I've necessarily seen that handbook and how they I do think that this is another body of data that already exists that is also going to help us understand. We can ask the community what they need, and we can also look at why they've called, to see what it is that they need or think they need or are concerned about, why they've called 911, why they've called the police department directly. I think that information is going to be really helpful to us too, and I'm looking forward to seeing it. Bonnie.
Yes, I agree with that. And as someone who went through the incredibly painful process of trying to make a police budget amendment in the spring, having that hard data and the numbers about who thinks what might be appropriate is good, but it's also on the side of the work we're doing. It's the backup, in my perspective. It's the work that putting that information over here for when we're defending what we're going to do after we make our recommendations is what that feels like to me. And the work here is the nuance of the conversation and the trust building, to be able to get this information from people, to have real conversations about what may have happened to them, and what, that experience next to this person's experience, how we might catch these things in a different way is a lot more nuanced than filling out a survey. Both of them are super valuable, but I think one is the reimagining and the other is the support. And also, as someone who is who eats this information for breakfast constantly, in our OneDrive, because I'm a dork, I've been uploading lots of resources for us to use that have a lot of different perspectives, a lot of different ideas on reimagining. This is the work, I know Almas was saying that people should be doing this research. That's the research, that's part of it right there. It's all packaged beautifully for us. There's more to be had from that, but especially for us with all of our time constraints, pop a podcast in your ear. There's a bunch of amazing articles on the appeal about these ideas. It's all, if you use the link that we were first given, because I noticed that when Devin sends a link, it only goes to this week's folder and it's a little hard to navigate back. Make sure you go back to the very first email to use that link, and it will give you the whole folder with all of them, or the whole folder with all of our folders in it. In there is a resource folder, and I made a whole document with different podcasts, different books. There's even free PDFs in there, free audio books. All of it is free. There's a million resources in there. Please read it, because I do all the time.
Yeah. And Devin, I just want to make sure that that folder that Bonnie's talking about, is that available to the public as well?
No, nope, this is internal, but I can take those materials and put them on your page, on the boards and commissions page. It's tough with the packet if it's not tied to an agenda item, like general information. It doesn't really have a place in the packet, but I can put those materials that are transferable on your board and commission page.
I think that'd be great if we can make a home for that on our webpage. Bonnie makes an important point. She always does, but the idea that we're going to need to provide support for the recommendations that we're making. I think part of that is going to be really thinking about, is this the right time? I think it is, based on everything that I've seen and read, is this the right time to do this kind of work? Are there functions that are better suited for other departments, or issues that are better handled in other ways? I think that we're going to need to provide some evidence that that's the case. And there's, that work, whether it happens now, 2 months from now, or before we produce our results, our recommendations, that work needs to happen, because there are the work of this task force needs to overcome the status quo, which is a very powerful force. Folks in positions of power, in order to maintain things the way that they always have been, all they need to do is say no. They don't have to counter your arguments. They don't have to win an argument. All they have to do is they vote and they say no. And so the work of this task force needs to be persuasive in order for whatever recommendations we decide are necessary to actually be enacted. So that work, that's also part of our work somewhere along the line, and any data we can collect along the way, I think, is going to be helpful to that. All right, we've got.
That's my point about how we need to make sure that whatever we do gets carried forward. I'm one of those people who you would point out and say, well, that guy, he's one of those people in power. And I've seen it time and again, that people don't want to change because they just don't want to change, because it's right or wrong or whatever. They're just happy with what's going on. We have to make them unhappy.
All right. Just under 5 minutes left. So here's what I'm going to propose is that for our next meeting, we start to dig down into maybe what the idea around. I know we want to have a group that's doing some envisioning, but what programs come? This is your homework. Come ready to discuss what programs are currently exist, and the best place to let you saw former Chief O'Leary's presentation last week, but the annual report, the 2019, the 2018, you can go back in time, but particularly the most recent annual report is a great place to look to see how the department organizes itself and what programs are currently out there. I've identified a few. You may have other interests. We'll decide as a task force what what programs we want to conduct an analysis on. I've got some like preliminary questions that I think will be helpful in performing an analysis, but I want to talk about what a program analysis actually looks like. We can discuss that, as well as issue analysis, right? So there may not be a program specifically focused on issues related to the unhoused or homelessness, but that might be an issue that we want to dig into. There are probably others. This is where you all come in. So please take a look at that annual report and think about what units of analysis we want to focus on. That is, what programs, what issues that might be a good fit for a subgroup or a subcommittee to start to look into. And then we can also think and have a larger conversation about department level analysis, sort of those questions I asked about, programs aside, do we think we need this many officers for a community our size with crime rates at the levels that they have been over recent years? Those kinds of that kind of analysis I think is important too. So we'll do that. Chief, can we just hear from you? Do you think by next week, are you ready to present some data? There were two requests, and I don't know if we should handle them both next week or sort of spread them out a little bit, but there were two requests, one around the dispatch data and then the other one around crime data, and to maybe better understand and ask some questions about that. What do you think?
I'm planning on having both, putting together a PowerPoint and sending it out, breaking it into the crime data, the 911 calls, and then we're doing an analysis of all of our CAD calls over the 2-year period and give you the high point and the low point.
Was that last term you used, CAD?
The CAD, the computer aided dispatch. So when the calls come into the PD, they get put into the computer and they're given a title of, and we're going to go by the titles to see how many calls do we get. And you had said, and it's true, that the crime rate in Brookline has gone down over the last number of years, which is a good thing. But you'll also see that a lot of our service functions have increased as well.
Okay, great. Looking forward to it. The last thing I'll say is it does look like we're moving forward with that September 30th public hearing jointly with the Committee to Reform Policing in Brookline. I think it's slated for 7 p.m. that night. I'll work with the chair of the committee. We've got to produce some kind of promotional materials that we can get out very broadly, and that'll be a topic of conversation for our next meeting, which again is next Friday at 8 a.m. And the links for members of the public, the links for these meetings are the same each and every week, and you can find the agenda at least 48 hours in advance of our meetings at brooklinema.gov, and by going to calendar and looking for us next Friday. With that, we're about to hit 10 o'clock, so I'll thank you all for your time. I'll make sure if you have any questions or anything like that, please run them through Devin, and we'll address them between now and then. But otherwise, we'll see you next Friday. All right. Thank you, everybody. Great meeting.